So this is the annual licensing committee meeting. And before we get onto the public agenda, I would just like to pay tribute and have us all a moment to think about two very important members of the licensing team that very sadly we lost in the past year. Patricia Serwan, who sadly passed away in April 21, and Patrick Crowley in March. And I know many of us have spoken already at full council about the impact both of those people have had on licensing, and particularly Patrick. He really was a true inspiration, an amazing team leader. And I know he really created an amazing family environment in the licensing team, and I know he's very much missed. And for us members in the committee, many of us who were new, he really guided us and really helped us a lot. And then many of the older members I know have had a lot of experience with him having helped us. So I think we're all very impacted by his loss. So I just want to pay tribute to him and thank him publicly for all that he has done. So now onto the matters of today. We have apologies of absence. Councillor Wason, Councillor Retty, Councillor Barrow-Cox, Councillor Williams. Is Councillor Pat Mason coming, do we think? No idea. Okay, and sadly, Councillor Thalassisis, the lead member for planning, can't be with us today. Any declarations of interest? None from myself. No. And then we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of February 21. Any comments on these, or shall I sign them as correct? Agreed? Thank you. So now we're moving on to the papers. We have the A4, the effect of coronavirus epidemic on licensed premises. So this is for information, but if anybody wants to have any questions on that. No? Just getting to slightly out of order, so I'm just getting to it in here. No questions at all. Gosh, well, I've got a question. Yeah, I think it's a really brilliant paper. Thank you for who put it together. Which individual officer actually put it together? Ah, Fiona, thank you. Really interesting. I think it's super interesting to see, you know, you've broken out the public houses, because I know there's a concern for many councillors in 83 in our ward. And I'm quite intrigued. I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit more about 3.3 on versus off sales, because I think that's going to be challenging coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. What I would just like to say, first of all, prior to the Business and Planning Act actually coming into force, what we did as a team, we've actually followed Kit Malthouse MP's guidance, in that we had a pragmatic approach to any premises that wasn't currently operating. So what we did within the team, all those premises that were licensed for on sales only, we allowed them to actually submit an application for off sales, but by way of a minor variation, which was less consultation, less fees involved, rather than a full variation, as long as they met certain requirements, such as the off-licence hours they're requesting had to be in line with the on-sales hours they already had, and whether they had any complaints or not. If they had substantial complaints, then they would have to do a normal variation. If it was a premises that was operating without complaint, then we gave them permission to submit a minor variation. So funnily enough, the Business and Planning Act actually came into effect after that. Since then, as you can see in paragraph 3.3, we've currently got 274 premises that are licensed for on sales only. Out of those, 207 establishments actually chose to apply for a pavement licence, which is quite a good uptake. Throughout the pandemic, officers have been going out and visiting licensed premises just to make sure they're aware of the ever-changing coronavirus regulations, whether they needed any assistance. And one of the things they were truly grateful was the fact that they could actually partake in alfresco dining.
Thank you for that, and thank you for all the work your team has done to facilitate all that. Any other comments? Janet.
I would like to commend the chair and the officers for their understanding and help to various people in hospitality, and the flexibility and the insight that you showed illustrated your understanding of the industry. And I thank you from both sides of the podium. Now.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Thank you. Okay, so that was for information, so thank you very much for that. And now we have a 5 pavement licensing. Again, this is for information, but again, very thorough report. Any questions?
Thank you, Chair. And well, first thing, just to say well done to the officers for the James and everybody else who's helped you for the enormous amount of applications you've had to process, and to our chair for turning around those that went to a chair's decision, and indeed the second vice chair who did one of the 18 wards that the chair was conflicted in, because there's been an enormous amount of work. The question I've got though is we've of course still got the tables and chairs licensing scheme on the books, as it were. The pavement licences are much less expensive for premises to apply for. I'm just wondering what the future of the original tables and chairs licences might be, what thoughts we've got. Are there any benefits to premises to paying the extra money to have one of those, or in the current climate, are we just going to see pavement licences going forward?
So the Highways Act licences, they will remain available always, because that part of the Act can be used in various ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be used for tables and chairs, it can be used for other things. So those powers will always be there. But really, if you're shopping around, you would never choose them now if you had a tables and chairs proposal, because the Highways Act, the thing with the Highways licence is it doesn't come with deemed planning permission. I mean, that's the game changer with the pavement licence. So the pavement licence has proved to be very popular with business, and in turn it's been popular, with politicians and the public alike. So it's going to hang around in one form or another. So we've now had 2 rounds of the Business and Planning Act, to 2021 and now to September 2022. I've heard they're now going to extend it a further year, probably to September 2023. The intention is to bring in a bill for a permanent regime, but that won't be done in time, for the next round as such. So I believe we're getting another round of 1-year licenses coming up. The government is looking at the fees, and also potentially the time taken to process the applications. So at the moment, the fee is fixed at £100. And I think the idea when that was set in spring 2020 was that, the hospitality businesses had just got an awful shock with the first lockdown, and a lot of their cash flow probably would have been impacted in a very unexpected way. So I think that's why it was set at a very, very low level. The figure that has been floated around is perhaps for next year it would be increased to £350. Flat fee across the country. They're seeking comments from local authorities on how that would reflect their costs, etc. We've no idea, and I don't think the government do either, how the permanent bill or act that will probably come in next year at this stage, how that's going to look. It may take elements from the Highways Act and elements from the Business and Planning Act, and come up with a whole new set of arrangements. I don't know, but the Business and Planning Act has proved an application to be, reasonably flexible, reasonably agile for the businesses, and for the authority. The real thing that's the killer is the 2-week processing time. I mean, if that could be changed, I think people would live with the Business and Planning Act or something similar into the future, because it has proven to be quite useful in application.
Thank you. Thank you for that extra information. That's very interesting to know. Thank you. Councillor Schmetling.
Good morning. Also, my thanks to the officers for the excellent reports. and the support for the residents and businesses. The question I have on this Business and Planning Act is, I mean, it's the first time I hear it might be extended yet again. As you probably know, there's been considerable pushback from residents in certain streets, including one or two in my own ward. And the refrain is, understandably, that people were prepared to be patient and flexible when there's a pandemic on, but are not prepared to put up with this permanently. And I know it's a bigger discussion, perhaps not for today, but it is a problem on various things. I mean, the 2-week turnaround is obviously a mechanical problem, which you've mentioned, but this is something we have to consider, that there's a lot of pushback on it, and I don't know if the government extends the current arrangements by another year, what the consequences of that will be in terms of sentiment amongst residents. Thanks.
James, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so there's the legislation itself, and then there's how the council applies the legislation. So the council has decided to apply it, one might say liberally, you could use that term, to allow, plentiful outdoor dining. So, I mean, ultimately the legislation provides us with a framework, but this council still has the discretion to use that framework as it sees fit.
Can I just jump in here, Councillor Matting? Also, because I believe the key decision has been passed about al fresco and potentially looking at just summertime and not having kind of plastic covered garden sheds on our streets.
That's correct.
Well, sorry, go on.
A key decision was confirmed on Monday and is due to be implemented next week. That sets out how we will regulate tables and chairs in the borough going forward. And the idea is that on what we call parklet terraces, they would become summertime only terraces, albeit it's a broad definition of summer, it's British summertime, so about 7 months a year. These things obviously are necessarily temporary, so they should comprise of removable objects such as planters or umbrellas. And the sort of timber gazebos we've seen on our streets, they wouldn't be licensed in the future under the adopted policy that will come in from summer 2023.
I know there was this concept of summer only as defined. There's still a problem with that. And just to go back a step, the current arrangements are really two. One is the pavement, being on the pavement, actually on the footway. That's always been available, it's just not being used freely. The second thing, and the bigger problem, is sticking it is to lose parking spaces. Part of the pushback is because of loss of parking, and that is not mitigated by having it only 6 months of the year. And of course, in summer, when it gets warmer, people keep their windows open, so the noise becomes even more important. So I think, I would hope that this could be reviewed to see what happens, because it's a very difficult one. I appreciate that. I mean, I like the idea, but it's also using up space on the carriageway that's a problem. I don't have any.
Can I just jump in here, because I think we have actually had some statistics on the amount of parking spaces lost, and then also the consultation proved the only reason it's gone for a key decision because the consultation was positive. Like there was more in favour. Is that right, Mr. McCall?
Yeah, that's right. So we published our indicative policy document that we intend to apply for next year. We published that online for 6 weeks in late 2021. The consultation ended on the 31st of December. Around 70% of the responses we received were positive, and they said that it was a good thing to support, outdoor dining and to have, extensive seating areas on our streets. Before we launched that consultation, we had the courage to do so based on the results of a citizens panel survey, which is a representative sample, I think, of about 300 borough residents that was carried out during the summer. And that found that I don't know the exact percentage, but roughly 3/4 of our residents are very much in favour of sort of the opportunity to, eat outdoors and outdoor dining terraces. So there is support. Obviously, there's pros and cons. There certainly is an impact on parking, but it's in summer 2021. It amounted to 110 parking bay suspensions. Obviously, they are clustered. They're groups of maybe 4 or 5 on the streets, you know, where the alfresco dining is taking place. So I suppose there is localized impact such that people have to go around the corner to find a parking space. But that is correct.
Thank you. Councillor Smettling, we've got 3 other councillors waiting to
I know,
ask
but
questions. So I think you've had your turn. No,
Can I just say-
I'm coming back to you, Councillor Smettling. Councillor Blakeman.
Yeah, I just wondered why the final 6 that were refused.
Well, I mean, in all cases, I'll go down through the list, but in all cases, you know, site-specific considerations would have been taken into account. I'll just go down through the list and find the ones that were refused, and hopefully my memory will serve me well. Okay, 37 Thurlow Place. That was for tables and chairs to be placed on a mews. It would be cheek by jowl with residential properties on a mews. It was right at the opening of the mews, so it would have prevented access to the mews. It was the only real proposal of that type that we've received in the last year. The premises in question didn't really have much space out to the front, and that's why they proposed it. Cheney Walk, 50 Cheney Walk. Again, it was a case where actually what they were proposing would have basically impacted on highway operation. There just wasn't enough room to place their terrace. Their footway was very narrow, so they proposed having an installation on the roadway, but it would have actually blocked the roadway and it was unacceptable. 8 to 10 Bina Gardens, that one was a hotel. It's quite a large hotel, and they already have tables and chairs in the footway. We felt that they didn't need the support necessarily of suspending parking bays to provide a terrace in that situation. We judged, you know, looking at the character of the street and looking at the nature of the business and how we could help them and how it could serve to animate the street, sort of, you know, strengthen placemaking in the borough. We just felt it wasn't doing any of that. 2 to 4 Farmers Street. That's a premises that already has quite an extensive private forecourt itself. So they have capacity maybe for 20 people to sit outside already without using the highway. So for a period, I think from March to September, given, you know, the situation with the pandemic and trying to support people, we did give them 1 bay on the highway. I believe it was quite successful for them, but it did contribute maybe slightly to the noise of the street. It's quite a narrow, tight street. And when it came for them to renew for a further year, the members thought that they had had enough and that
But also there was an issue with fire engines not being able to go down the street. It was so narrow, weren't they? And some parking bays need to be removed.
Yes, that is exactly right, actually. I think
yeah.
good
Sorry.
memory. No, there's so much to say here. So that's in Hillgate Village. So in Hillgate Village, roughly 10 spaces were taking out because the roads are too narrow for a fire engine. So given that we lost about 10 residence parking bays as a result of that, taking an 11th just probably wasn't palatable given that context.
I think that's more or less it. Is that all right, Councillor Bateman?
There's one more, Kensington Hotel. That was refused because we didn't feel that it was in fitting with the character of the area.
They already had it in the main lockdown. They did have it they did definitely have it, and it was only in the subsequent relaxation of restrictions that it was removed. Thank you very much. I'm just moving now to Mary-Therese. You had a question?
Yes, just what Dolly was saying. In my ward, in one road in particular, Hollywood Road, we have had a lot of problems with residents not being happy with the alfresco dining. And it's not just the alfresco dining, it's the fact that it attracts more crowds. And what we did is people felt they wanted to help the restaurants, so they accepted it, but not in perpetuity. And they're not happy. And we knocked on every single door that we could speak to someone in Hollywood Road. And even though some people weren't bothered by it, the majority of people were against it. And what they're saying is essentially, how can RBKC license this when they do not have the people or the wardens or whatever to police it late at night? And I'm afraid to say they are very unhappy, and they're going to remain very unhappy. And it really worries me that, it's only a small number of residents, because it's just the ones that live, in close proximity. But they are going to be, disturbed by this for quite some time, even if it's just in the summer. And what we're not doing is addressing the amount of vertical drinking that it then attracts, and crowds and noise and whatever. And, the residents can't sleep at night, and they're not happy.
Thank you for that. I think we need to note that, and to make sure that we ask enforcement to make sure work together on this one, I think, and speak to the lead member about what can be done on that. And I know Councillor Hammond.
Yeah, I was just going to come back and on this very interesting point, because of course we're not the decision-making committee on this subject. The paper is for information, but we all have our ward experiences of it. But I think we need to be very mindful that the consultation was strongly in favour of it, of this overall. But where we're making individual decisions, that's where we have to be very sensitive to the locals, and that's of course our job, both the officers and the chair of the committee, and it's taking into account of local circumstances. And as we move out of the emergency period and normalise this, it's where we have to really take account of the people that live around, in the case that Councillor Rossi was describing. But it's by no means a universal problem. The Bute Street residents, I think, split 80% in favour of doing the work. It's quite a small sample because not many people live there, but they were largely in favour of it, as I understand. And other examples in fact, the only other example in my ward is on a major road, so and it's a bit of a grey area, but which we can discuss on its merits at some other time. But it's quite a mixed bag, and I think we have to treat each case on its merits when it comes up.
Thank you. It's always very good to hear all these comments. Councillor Smettling.
Well, I'm glad to. Thank you very much, because actually I was going to make one more point / question, but it helped that particularly Councillor Rossi made her points, because that's exactly the issue I have in one of the streets in my ward. It is true, obviously, that the overall result was massively in favour. It's also true that the number of parking spaces taken up is a very small percentage, but that is kind of it doesn't help. What matters is what's, as was said, happening in the streets. So my question is, can we be very flexible in the application? In other words, we can be much more restrictive in certain streets than others, and people don't come along and say, well, why are you being restrictive to me when you've let people 500 metres away do something and you don't let us? I think that's the key to be, as actually I think Councillor Hammond indicated, that we can be very specific, well, to put it another way, treat each case on its merits. If we do that, if we have the strength to do that, I think we will overcome the problems. I mean, we might refuse in certain streets, we could say no, for example.
Can I comment there? Yes, as James said, I mean, we've had a couple of meetings with the Minister. In fact, one was yesterday, and they're very, very pro pavement licenses. It is a streamlined process. They don't have to worry about planning or street trading. But the concerns you've raised are very important. But the Act does allow you to consider public nuisance in a sense, which the Highway Act doesn't. So you've got a criteria that you can consider the application on. We tried very hard to urge the government to extend the consultation period so it was longer to give people more time. The other thing I should say is that the feedback we got is that the government was anticipating it would simply be an administrative process, i.e. members and committees wouldn't get involved. And we're one of the very few authorities who have a process whereby the chair or the vice chair gets involved. Across the country, there was a lot of people attending these meetings. None of them have that process. So you do have an added layer. And that's you have that because obviously under the Highway Act, you've got this procedure in the Constitution that says if there's more than 3 objections, you will consider it. That is an added layer. I think that they are going to extend it. And if they do extend it, they won't make any tweaks at all to the legislation, because that requires primary legislation. So all they're going to do is change the date as they did last year. But they are listening, and there is a consultation out at the moment, which I know James is going to respond to, and other authorities.
Thank you for clarifying that. And
Thanks.
thank you, Councillor Mettling. I think we've definitely noted in the minutes your comments, and Councillor Rossing, Councillor Hammond and Councillor Evans and Councillor Bateman. So I think we'll make sure that the lead member reads these minutes and our concerns are noted. So thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for that report, Ms. McCall. That was very informative. So now we're moving on to a 6 annual review of transport and highways fees for decision. Which officer is speaking to this? Thank you, Mr. White.
I'm here to present the 2022-23 transport licensing and highways fees and charge report. We've taken a base increase of 2% for all charges and generally rounded up to the nearest pound. Any major changes been noted in the comments column in the table within the appendix. I'd like to make you aware that we've proposed to raise to make the cost of the chair licences for 2022-23 to £21, which is a raise of £2 per chair. This raise hasn't changed since 2018. My colleague to the left, James McCall, can explain further if necessary why this isn't a thing. I've also spoken to another colleague, Gary Noble, who is head of highway maintenance and projects, regarding the 4% increase in the technical approval of highway structures. Mr. Noble can't be present at this meeting, but he has stated that most of the costs of this service are through increasing costs of specialist consultants, and this 4% increase covers that increases. I'm happy to take any further questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Smetling.
Thanks, Chair. Just more, partly a question, partly a comment. I noticed that the different boroughs define things differently. There's different classifications for different, I don't know, procedures or something. Is there any reason for this? Doesn't the law lay down a standard definition of whatever it is?
So just for clarity, Councillor Smetling is referring to the additional papers.
Oh yeah, sorry,
the
actual fees.
The different fees.
Yeah.
So this is also not just highways fees. This is other fees as well.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Fees. It's more. It'll probably more come to Ms. Dybels.
Okay.
Should we talk about that when we get to your report then? Yes, perfect. Anything on the highways? I have a question. fixed penalty notices. So obviously they can't be used to generate revenue. And I noticed that you have a good 90% payment, which is very good. Well done. But how much does that generate, and what does it then go back into?
I can't answer that at the moment, but I'll get back to the committee.
Thank you. And in general, all the fees cover the amount of work involved in checking the scaffolding and checking the skips and all that, does it, or not at all?
My colleagues are happy with the fees.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask, most of these increases are either below or just above 2%, but there are 3 under technical approval of highway structures on page 9, which are 4%. Is there any reason for that?
Page 9 has said that the cost of employing specialist consultants is increasing, so we have to cover that cost.
Any other questions? Because members, we have to make a decision on this. And the big increase, I guess, is chairs, which is quite relevant following the previous discussion. And again, going back to Mr. McCall's report, we're looking at a pavement licence, which is fixed at £100 versus the average price for our tables and chairs licence, which is about £850. And obviously the individual price per chair is going to add to that. So are we just going too far extreme sides of price? Should we keep the chairs less?
So the chairs, I think the chairs are priced at £21 each this year. So it's basically, the current fee structure came in about 7 years ago. Before that, we had a flat rate, and it was felt that it should be proportional, that more, the bigger your outfit, the more you should pay. So, for example, Lord and Harrods has over 100 chairs, but a lot of our licensees only has two chairs, say. So it was felt that they should pay a different rate. So that's why it is structured the way it is. Also, our fees and charges, they are set with reference to our costs. So again, about 7 years ago, an exercise was carried out that sort of covered the cost of our enforcement regime and our monitoring, and tried to divide it among the number of chairs in the borough and everything. And that's why it was set at the figure it's set at. Last year we didn't increase with inflation, nor the year before, as Mr. White has explained. But that's why we're increasing it now. As discussed earlier, it's largely academic because there's a very low uptake of these licenses at the moment.
Understood. Any questions? So does the committee agree to pass this report? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. And now we have the review of the licensing fees, paper A7. Are you speaking to that, Mr. Dybel? Thank you.
Good morning. So in calculating the proposed fees for the coming year, we've taken into account the changes to our officer hourly rates, which we get from our finance department. The grade of officer who is undertaking specific elements of the work involved. There have been some changes to our work processes in the past 2 years. Obviously, we're much more reliant now on electronic applications. In some cases, it's streamlined our process. In some cases, it's actually added to the process. And we also factor in a figure for expected committee costs. And again, there have been some changes there. So we anticipate what percentage of applications might receive objection and go on to a committee hearing. And that involves considerable cost, both to the officers, but also to the council in general. Where we have no previous history of applications, for example, scrap metal sites, occasional sales near beer, we calculate the fee based on what we think will happen, what we expect the level of work will be in dealing with that application. Because our fees are on a cost recovery basis, they are not subject to the automatic sort of increase that is recommended by the Director of Finance, which for the current year is 2%. But we do obviously try to make sure that our costs are recovered, but also keeping any increases as modest and as possible. So our gambling fees, there is a reduction in application costs for most applications. And again, that's because processes have been streamlined and in some cases officer costs have reduced. We get very few gambling applications, certainly since the Act came into effect. Probably new applications, we've had maybe 5 or 6. And variations, all the variations that we've had were at the beginning of the Act when people wanted to change their hours. So in terms of actual difference in revenue, it's negligible, really, one could say, on the application side. The annual fees for gambling have increased slightly more, I think in some cases, than the recommended 2%. But again, these are costs associated with ongoing monitoring, dealing with complaints, setting up our systems and the enforcement side of things. So again, the increases are quite modest there. The biggest change you'll probably notice is in the animal licences. And the reason for this is due to the increased costs of inspections. We have to have authorised animal health welfare officers undertaking inspections on licensed premises, and in some cases it has to be a licensed veterinarian. These visits are actually brought in from the City of London, the Corporation of London. They run the animal health side for us. It's contracted out because we just don't have that internal expertise. We don't have sufficient applications to warrant employing our own animal health inspector. And we did have one officer who was looking to get qualified. Unfortunately, lockdown hit, and it's quite difficult. It was quite difficult for her to actually complete all the different assignments because you have to actually visit every single one of these type of licenses that you might have to deal with. And the fact is, we just don't have the volume of applications or licenses, like different licensed premises. So their fees have increased. And certainly last year we didn't increase the fees at all. But again, we're trying to recover as much of the cost as possible. Some of the costs are still being borne by the department. There is a standing fee which is borne by us, but the actual cost of the inspections for the particular premises have been included in our fees calculations. At the moment, the only licensed premises that we have on the animal licences are for dog daycare and for home boarding. I think we have 3 or 4 licences there, and we have one licence which is for a dangerous wild animal. But other than that, we have no other animal licences. The only other fees which again are increasing more than the recommended 2% are our pre-application fees. And again, we've looked at our costs, we've looked at the work involved, and the proposed costs are much more reflective of the actual work involved. I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you. And again, very thorough and interesting report. And you mentioned streamlined processes a lot. So thank you for that. That is good. Is that just more online applications? Is what has it become more streamlined?
Yes. So obviously with lockdown, postal applications pretty much went out the window. So we were having to receive all the applications electronically, whereas previously most applications would come in by post, so then it would involve somebody scanning those in. There were additional costs involved there. So we've taken those out of the process now.
That's good. So there has been some advantage to the pandemic. Any questions, committee? Councillor Bateman.
Sorry, yes, on page 6, selling animals as pets. You say we've got no applications. Does that include fish? I mean, tropical fish. Because I think there is a premise that sells tropical fish.
Well, certainly if they're selling fish, then they do require a licence. We don't have any currently. We did have a number of premises along Kensington High Street who used to sell goldfish as part of the Iranian New Year. I believe it's a custom to give goldfish, and they used to have to be licensed as pet shops, but they've not been licensed under the new regime. They no longer provide that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to check the premises, but I'll just, find out if they still sell fish.
If you're aware, if you can pass that on, we'll look at that.
Yeah, and just about the animals, I know we've discussed this at length because I am concerned about those costs. And I do think animals provide an absolute lifeline for many of our residents. And I am concerned that those costs could actually significantly impact on people who occasionally need their dogs walked by someone else. And you are looking at not necessarily training a specific officer, because I understand that doesn't make sense, but maybe finding an inspector closer to home rather than the City of London, if that was any cheaper.
I think one of the difficulties that we have is that under the animal welfare licensing, the officer not only has to be an expert in animals, but they also have to know the licensing legislation. In terms of boarding, the costs for actually renewing the licenses has actually reduced slightly. So for the dog daycare and the dog daycare, the renewal costs have come down by 9.5%, and for home boarding, they've come down by 21%. And these licenses, generally speaking, run up to 3 years. So this is not an annual fee that they're paying. They're paying on the application. And
that's good. I hadn't appreciated that. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Smethling.
I'll come back to the question I asked at the wrong point, which is about the comparison with other boroughs. How different the fees seem to be, or also the categories seem to be. And even with our neighbouring 2 boroughs of Westminster and Hammersmith and Fulham, is a big difference. I can see why Westminster might be different because they're the kind of commercial heart of London. But also, is Hammersmith and Fulham, do they have the same fees as Westminster, except for the extra large? But why is it so different from borough to borough, do you think?
So the pre-application advice is not a statutory service. It is an additional service. Essentially, I think prior to about 5 or 6 years ago, we would spend a lot of time with licensees before they submitted their application, invariably with solicitors, giving them advice for free, attending site visits. And at some point it was decided that actually that is a service that really they should be paying for. I have to say actually that the majority of our pre-application advice requests come through via solicitors. So and often it is licensing solicitors who are seeking that advice. They want to discuss with the officers beforehand. So now we're actually getting in some revenue for that. We do still give general advice to people when they need help filling in their form. We'll take them through it step by step, small businesses. But if they want advice on what hours they might be seeking, what conditions they should impose on their licence and other things, then that is a paid for service that we offer.
Thanks. And otherwise, in terms of the actual licensing fees for applications as opposed to pre-app, are they all fixed statutorily? So each borough has the same structure. It might have different fees, but same structure.
Yes, so the Licensing Act fees, which is the main bulk that we deal with, they are set by statute and they are based on the rateable value of the premises, and that is countrywide.
Thanks.
Thank you for clarifying that. And yes, I think it is good that we're putting up our pre-application fees. So, and no other comments, questions? Shall we move to whether we agreeing with this or not? I agree. Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. And we have the performance monitoring report A8 now, please. Is that Fiona or Sharon? Sharon? Thank you.
It's me again for my sins. So we've changed the format of the report this year, following the comments that we received from the committee last year, and we've included comparison with the previous 3 years, which is quite helpful, I think, given the pandemic, and it does give the committee some indication, I guess, on how the pandemic has affected licensed businesses, whether we've had an increase, a decrease, number of applications. For last year, table 2, which is on page 2, we can see that the number of applications has recovered from last year, other than temporary event notices. We're still down on temporary event notices, 300 to 350 on what we would expect in an average year. The figures there for 2018 and 2019 are actually what we would normally expect to see in an average year. So certainly in terms of temporary event notices, we're way down. What I found quite interesting when I was putting these figures together was the number of new grant applications for premises licences, and that's gone up. That's the biggest increase I've seen in all the years I've worked here in 1 year. And I think some of that is down to the fact that a lot of landlords wanting to protect their interests were submitting applications for shadow licences. And currently we have around 50 premises that have shadow licences in addition to the licence that is being operated by the business operator. One of our main losses, I guess, really, other than the temporary event notices, has been in special treatment premises, and they have been amongst the hardest hit by the pandemic. They have suffered closures of anywhere between 8 and 9 months in the past 2 years, which is you know, it's phenomenal, really. Fortunately, because those fees are set by the council, at last year's committee meeting, your committee did agree to support businesses, and they were given a pro rata discount for every month that they were closed. So that has helped them. So I mean, we get a lot of compliments from our special treatment businesses. They are so grateful for the help that the council has provided to them to help get them through the pandemic. And we've also extended the terms on which they can pay. So, you know, we've given them longer to pay. So that's been really helpful to businesses. But other than that, I mean, the number of applications that we've dealt with, other than that, has been pretty similar to previous years. So just moving on to one of the other tables, which is table 5, which is on page 5. This is the number of suspended notices, lapsed and surrendered licenses. And again, it was interesting when I was putting these figures together that actually the number of surrendered and lapsed licenses is not as many as I would have expected, which is perhaps an indication that businesses are managing to sort of hang on and you know, keep things going despite the pandemic. Our level of debt has increased slightly, and we have more suspended notices, suspended licenses at the moment than we've had for some time. I think at the current, this figure of 18 relates to 2021. I think currently we have around 45 licences suspended due to non-payment, and those businesses are not currently operating. Now, it may be that some of those businesses have closed permanently and they've not told us. And so we are continuing to make inquiries to find out what's going on with those businesses, because obviously the annual fees continue to grow while the businesses are closed. But again, those businesses that hadn't paid their fees, we didn't do any chasing until the autumn of last year. So they did have some relief, but we have now started to chase them, and the majority are paying. Those that are having some difficulties, we have given a bit longer to pay. I don't know if Fiona wants to add anything about the inspections and complaints, perhaps.
Well, throughout the pandemic, officers have still been working, albeit they may have been working remotely. There was a stage during the first lockdown where officers were working from home, but if we did get any complaints or allegations of premises opening, then we would actually go in and visit those premises. So we did still try to inspect all the premises that we could. We still dealt with any complaints that came in, often visiting residents in their homes, to kind of like alleviate the issues and, you know, try to see if there was a happy medium we could reach. So you can see on table 6, that's just a list of inspections that were carried out. But we've only got to 2021, we haven't got the 2022 figures there. So you can see even during COVID, there were 30 inspections that were carried out, and those were high-risk premises. High-risk premises are those premises that have got a history of contraventions of their premises licence or receiving complaints from local residents. You can see in table 7, that's a list of complaints. So we received 58 complaints about premises operating in contravention of the COVID regulations. Not all of those premises were in fact operating in breach. There were so many changes to the regulations that even officers found it hard to keep up to date with what was the new one. I'm sure members will recall the Scotch Egg Incident. Is Scotch Egg, you know, a substantial meal? So we did usually get quite a lot of complaints from residents where they thought premises should be closed when in fact they could be operating. Table 8, that's just a report again on different conditions, different breaches of conditions and coronavirus complaints that we received. The majority of complaints were again premises operating in breach of the coronavirus regulations, but again, not all of those were found to be true. One thing I would like to point out again, and that's in paragraph 4.11, members will recall that in the first lockdown in 2020, officers did receive quite a lot of concern about street drinking and what the police called UMEs, unlicensed music events, especially in the Portobello Road area. However, in 2021, we didn't receive any such complaints nor reports of such. So that was quite good for officers because it was quite a telling time indeed. Cautions and prosecutions. The first one on the list is Moonflower, which is at 25A Elscourt Gardens, SW5 OTR. That is a premises, it was licensed to provide beauty treatments. However, officers received complaints from local residents that the premises may have been offering services other than massages and so on. There were allegations that the premises was offering sexual services. Subsequently, we decided as a team to send in some undercover operatives to go in to see if they would be offered services. And it so happened that the male was offered sexual services, but he didn't take them up on the offer. Following that, we actually did a joint inspection of the premises with the Met Police, and during that we found various breaches of the special treatment licence had taken place. Subsequently, we decided that a prosecution would follow. However, because of the onset of COVID, the licence holder herself was caught up in Wuhan, China, during the months following the start of the pandemic, so she couldn't make it back over. And then it was decided that it was no longer in the public interest to actually engage with or to continue with the prosecution. So we issued both her and the manager that was on duty at the time during the inspection with a simple caution. And that will remain on our files for 3 years. So if it so happens that either the manager or the owner decides to apply for a licence again, then we will refer back to that simple caution. The second one was Casa Cruz, 123A Clarendon Road, and I think members will recall this as the Rita Ora affair. That was when in 28th of November 2020, a private party was held against the coronavirus regulations. During investigating that incident, the officers realised that there was a breach of condition relating to CCTV, in that they weren't able to actually produce CCTV for the night in question. Subsequently, a review was held. And also the premises, I think it was the DPS? Yeah, the DPS, yeah. DPS was given a simple caution for those breaches. Okay. So moving on to paragraph 5, it's all the work that the licensing team has done within the last 20 months or so. So we've seen a review of the gambling policy that went live on the 6th of January, and that needs to be reviewed again in 3 years' time, unless something else comes to light that we need to amend in the time being. Throughout the pandemic, officers within environmental health and licensing had to complete a weekly return on coronavirus related work. So every visit we made, every prohibition notice we issued, every warning letter, we had to report to government on our, everything we did. So that was quite time consuming as well. Notting Hill Carnival, although the actual event didn't actually physically go ahead, there was a virtual carnival again last year, and officers were heavily involved, just monitoring the area on foot and in car, just to make sure that there were no UMEs taking place. And we're quite pleased to actually confirm that none were found. The Design Museum, Kensington High Street. The licensing team liaised with the Design Museum regarding their proposals to have a pop-up restaurant at the rear external area of the building. This was in line with the government saying, please eat and drink outdoors. So the officer liaised extensively with them, advised them of who to contact, to liaise extensively with the residents and so on. And I'm pleased to say that that licence was granted. And I think it was a very, it was a highly sensitive area. And I think everyone enjoyed taking part in the, facilities out there. So that was good. The Euro went ahead after it was delayed due to the COVID.
Just take the two football ones together, shall we?
Okay, yeah. Euro was delayed due to COVID, but licensing officers and Met Police liaised extensively with the licensees just to make sure they had everything in hand. To make sure that the events went ahead without any due problems. With the Chelsea football home games, that's something that we normally do on a normal basis. We liaise extensively with the off licences and the pubs, especially in the Earls Court Road area, just to make sure that they're abiding by their football club conditions, and also that they've got necessary security on to deal with the crowds that come down. Yeah, I mean, there's some other things there, unless you really
I think you've covered a lot. I think it's a huge amount of work you've undertaken. And just, I suppose I just want to just jump ahead to the hybrid noise and licensing enforcement officer, which I'm super pleased to see has happened. And is that going to be the way forward?
We hope. So we've got a very experienced officer from Noise that's actually joined licensing, and she's a hybrid noise and licensing officer. And it does help because when we go out on visits and also liaise with residents, especially when we're speaking with them face to face, she's there and she can actually give her noise experience and actually help the situation rather than getting another officer from the noise team who, you know, might be otherwise occupied to come and do the visit. So it has worked really well, especially with pre-app advice as well. And also she's there to give another take on things that we as licensing officers might not necessarily know.
And so do you think there'll be future training to combine those roles a bit more so everyone has a little bit of each other's knowledge?
I hope so.
Okay, good. Any more questions? Councillor Hammond.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, Sharon and Fiona and your teams for this excellent report and all the work you've done over the last 12 months. Just a couple of simple questions. The temporary event notices haven't recovered, as you said, Sharon. I would deduce that's mostly due to the lack of a live Notting Hill Carnival last year, but perhaps you confirm that before I go on to the second question.
Yeah, we normally receive around 100 temporary event notices for that Carnival weekend, most associated with the Carnival and the sort of surrounding area. But yeah, there've been other events as well that were cancelled last year. So yeah.
Okay, so Carnival's a big proportion of it. And second question, just been bugging me for a while. There was an application that was adjourned just after the start of the pandemic for an application called My Sheesh in Pembridge, and it appears every week. I want to know that for 2 years we've been seeing that on our weekly email, and it seems to be stuck in limbo, still adjourned. What's going on?
Yeah, it was adjourned at the request of the applicant at the time because he had to apply for planning permission, and all attempts to actually get him to withdraw the application have failed so far. There was an agent and we contacted them several times. We speak to Anne on a weekly basis almost to try and get it off. We will make further attempts to get that application off, but unfortunately it doesn't just fall away. I mean, if it were to be pursued, our view would be that it would have to be re-advertised because it's been on there for so long that there will be other people who've moved into the area who won't have known about it and who could be disadvantaged. So maybe, yes, we will do more, but to try and get that off that list. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Judith Blakeman.
Yes, can I just going back to paragraph 4.11, 411. I was told by local police that there were 2 UMEs in Freston Road, which are not mentioned here, and I wonder whether the local police had actually reported them to the council.
I'll have to investigate on that. I personally wasn't aware.
There were no residents affected by it, so
yeah.
Perhaps it didn't get a complaint, but they certainly told me about it.
Yeah,
I didn't
okay,
know about
that's
it.
good to know.
Councillor Spalding.
Thank you, Chairman. 3 questions. First one, 2.6 and 2.8. You've got the aspiration in there of 90% within 10 working days. And you also say that you failed to meet it, but it will be useful for the committee to know by how much we failed to meet it.
Yes, I mean, this is as you say, the aspiration to grant and issue licences within 10 working days after the end of the consultation. We've had a number of difficulties, certainly with staffing for the past few years. In 2019, end of 2019, we lost a number of experienced members of staff to different departments within the council, and so we then have to re-employ new staff and train them. What we tend to do is we obviously prioritise those applications where the licence would be disadvantaged by any delay in issuing his licence. So that would be your new grants, your variations, because clearly they cannot operate until that licence is granted. With transfers and varied EPSs, they take second priority because nobody is disadvantaged if there is a delay in issuing those licences. There is a tick box on the form that says that it can have immediate effect while the application is in process. The other thing as well is that the actual processing of the application when it comes in takes priority over the issuing of the licence at the end of the process. And that's obviously because for temporary event notices, we have to process them within 1 working day. That is a statutory requirement on us. For applications that are open for public consultation, they are the priority to get on our system, so they go out on the email alerts. Dealing with objections and committees, all of that takes priority. So issuing licences for transfers and ferry DPSs and changes of address is lower down on the priority. Yes. So it's out of necessity that there is a delay in issuing those licences sometimes.
The question was, by how much did we miss the 90% within 10 days? I mean, did we only do 1% or did we do 89%? So,
I mean, last year we managed to get 75% of the licences out on time.
It's just to get a measure of how difficult it is for you. Because everything you've said, I understand and appreciate, as we all do. So we know about the churn, the turnover, staff difficulties, COVID, working from home, everything that's got in the way. So I just wanted to see, was it really serious? I think that's minor, 75% on a target of 90, given the circumstances. It was just to get a feel for it. And if it was really serious, we would want to do something about it. But in my opinion, that's not really serious.
No.
I mean, you might think it's a worry, but...
No, I mean, certainly, as I say, we prioritise those where somebody would be disadvantaged. If somebody's desperate to have their licence for whatever reason, you know, we will put them ahead of somebody perhaps.
And it's an aspiration, it's a target. Yeah.
It is.
Second question.
Yeah.
That's a good answer, thank you. Yeah. The second question is section 5. My ward is particularly affected by gambling policy and by special licenses. We've got concentration of a lot of these premises, and I know in planning there are rules about how many gambling premises you can have in one stretch of the high street. We had a borderline case where a new operator's come in with a new slot machine operation, and there's already a couple of betting shops there in the same section. And I think planning policy says you can have 2, or as a stretch, 3 in a row in a certain section of the high street. And I wonder if we can tighten up on that within licensing. And the same with special licenses, with a row of massage parlours. If there's some way that these can be more diluted and not concentrated into one section of one street, is there anything that can be done in licensing?
So under the old Gaming Act, which preceded the Gambling Act, in order to get a licence for gambling premises, you had to demonstrate that there was no unmet need within that area. So if there was already a betting shop, then you couldn't necessarily have another one next door. There is no such test under the Gambling Act, and the Gambling Act is similar to the Licensing Act. In some ways, it is a permissive act, and basically it says that the council should, I'm trying to think of the words that it shows, but shall aim to permit gambling to take place within its borough. Now, I think in terms of having a collection of premises in the same area, I don't think that the gambling policy can restrict that. I think that would be down to planning.
Could we talk to planning? Because I think planning's a bit hazy on this.
Okay, well, let's make a note.
Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3.
Okay, let's make a note to take that to planning if we may, because I think we're getting out of the remit of the licensing committee here if we're straying into that.
Yeah, thank you. Last question, if I may, Chairman. That again affects my ward, is the Chelsea home games. Every 2 weeks, Chelsea Football Club's got a home game. last week it was Plymouth who visited. Hundreds of away fans who are not used to London. The police kettled them into Earl's Court, and then they walked down through Brompton Cemetery to get to Stamford Bridge. So they've got a good route to get there. So I understand why they're doing it, to keep them away from Chelsea fans who drink before the match. They're usually lunchtime Saturday, sometimes Friday evenings. And so the away fans use this opportunity to drink. Now, they do congregate outside the pubs or down Earl's Court Road. Some of them are in the pubs, which I'm sure run things properly. But you've got hundreds of people who are not used to London, who are excited, nearly all men. They overspill onto the roads. They get in the way of the pedestrians. They frighten the children and elderly people. And they drink from cans, and they're drinking from single cans. Now, I know that we tell the off licenses not to sell single cans, but clearly they are. Now, the police are there, but they're not local police. They're drafted in from Central Met police operations for football matches. So they're not really particularly bothered about policing Earl's Court Road. They're just looking for violence.
So what's your question, Councillor Spalding? Because we are aware of the situation.
To pull people out of trouble. So, the question is, what are we doing in terms of policing the off licenses who are clearly fueling the drinking? I think there are breaches of their licenses. That's the off licenses in Earl's Court Road.
Yes, you are indeed correct. There are a few off licenses that do have conditions saying that they shouldn't sell single cans. Officers, we have got licensing enforcement officers out the majority of time when Chelsea are playing at home. They do regularly monitor the off licenses to make sure that they're in compliance with their conditions. Whilst monitoring, what some of them have found is that some of the away fans already come with their drinks from wherever they've come from, and then they stand outside the pubs and drink. There was a couple of occasions, I think last year, when there was 2 off licenses that may have sold alcohol. It wasn't single cans, so it wasn't effectively a breach of the licence condition, but they did sell it. So officers did actually liaise with the management and reminded them of their conditions on the licence. Most of those off licences also have CCTV, so on occasions the officers will go in post the event and have a look at the CCTV just to make sure there were no breaches of conditions. There was one occasion again last year where one operator did sell alcohol, and the person buying the alcohol actually opened the alcohol in the shop and drank it, and that is in fact a breach of condition. Again, the operator received a warning for that. So we do regular monitor. We have got the CCTV that we can look at as well. Also, the police are aware to let us know if they do see any contraventions taking place, and then we can deal with it.
Thank you. It's good to hear that, because I do know that the pubs have very strict rules on Chelsea match days, don't they, about their tables and chairs and plastic containers and everything. So thank you. Good question. I would just like to, I don't think there's any more questions. Oh, 2 more questions. Councillor Rossi.
Happens when you get something like Moonflower, which is very similar to a situation, I think a couple of years ago, that Janet and Pat were on Harmony in the Earl's Court Road. Do you then send in Stuart Priestley's team or immigration or someone to check whether, the people working in those sort of
short answer is yes, definitely. That was that from the Moonflower case, and so yes, but go on, Fiona, because you nod.
Yeah, we definitely do. We work closely with Stuart's team and also local police, and there's also immigration. We also work with the CSC team here at the town hall regarding them. We have got a meeting scheduled in the next couple of weeks regarding to have a discussion about, what's it called, slave labour and so modern slavery and so on. So it is in hand, and we do work closely with the authorities.
Kathleen?
Thanks. Just an observation is that also here, the number of cases which the committee sees is a very small proportion of the total that officers have to process, which is worth noting. It's a bit like planning. But I have a question, a small thing, perhaps next time, if you could show the number of shadow licenses as a separate line item. And the reason for that is that although administratively it's another license application, so clearly it takes up your time and so on, but it's in effect a duplicate of an existing license, or kind of a duplicate. So it gives it's just useful to know that. Is that possible?
Sorry, so I didn't catch what licenses, what applications?
Shadow licenses.
Shadow.
You didn't mention the number actually, but if it could just be shown as a line item. Thank you.
Very good point. Thank you, Councillor Martin. Yes, 50 premises of shadow licenses, I believe, was said. And I would just like to, that's what I was going to say, just to congratulate the licensing team for actually doing almost 600 applications and only 30 coming to committee. So I really appreciate the dialogue you must be having with all the applicants and the endless backwards and forwarding and with the objectors. And so I think that's really appreciated because, the committees cost a lot of money as well, as you say. So we don't want to be wasting public money. So thank you for that. Have I missed any more questions? Councillor Addenbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it's really just a matter of interest. On table 7, complaints, I know a lot of my residents find it very easy to stop me in the street and complain about a particular premises. And I encourage them to put in a complaint, but I actually wonder whether they really do. So, outside of this meeting, would it be possible to have per ward, I don't know about my colleagues, whether they would be interested, complaints, a list of complaints for each premise? Because I think we have some which are fine, there's no problem at all, but I think there are a few that there's niggles within the local residents, and I'm not sure whether they're really putting the complaints in. Thank you.
We obviously know which premises these relate to. One of the difficulties is that obviously we receive complaints, but not every complaint that we receive can be validated, if you know what I mean. The officers may not get there until afterwards. Most of this, we can certainly do it by ward. I think to do a list.
Can I jump in here? Because I can just see the workload of that is huge. And I would probably do it the other way around, that if you have a specific place you're concerned about, then we can ask for the noise and nuisance reports on that. Because we had a case just this week where we had 18 pages of noise and nuisance reports just on one premises. And it was very interesting because it was very, some of them found out that the noise and nuisance was actually somewhere else, but some were upheld. And so it's quite nuanced, the report. So I would suggest probably going around it that way.
Okay,
sorry. To do it by ward is quite, it's a relatively simple task to break it down by ward, but to break it down by premises is more difficult sometimes.
Okay, I think that we've got a planning application in for one premise at the moment, and there's historically been issues with that particular premise. So if I come to you, maybe that's the way to do it. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So that's the end of that report. That was super interesting once again, and lots of questions. So thank you, committee. We now have a 9 update for appeals. So I believe that's Mr.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm pleased to say this is a very short report. So that's good news. That means that you and all the officers are doing their job properly, because we're not getting many appeals. And in fact, I've mentioned 5 appeals, but 3 relate really just to try and recover costs. The first 3, so in relation to Subterranea and Ping, that's where we've got an award for costs, but we haven't recovered any for Subterranea at all. And Ping, we've only recovered 5,500 out of 10,000, well, nearly 11,000. So that they're only on the paper because the costs haven't been recovered. So the two live appeals that were last year were UKAI, which I'm sure many of you are very aware of, which we did receive appeal, but I think I said that was a flagrant abuse of the process, and in fact the solicitors had to agree and they withdrew it in the end, and we did get costs back. And then the last appeal, that is the live appeal at the moment, is Ariadne's. It took a month of Sundays to try and get confirmation from the magistrates' courts as to whether there was indeed a valid appeal. I mean, the magistrates' courts have suffered during the pandemic in relation to cases, but more generally, particularly licensing appeals. They're not a priority because, you know, there's lots of people who've got criminal convictions hanging over their heads, so obviously they are going to prioritise those sorts of cases. So licensing appeals does really get the back seat. So we do have a live appeal in relation to Ariadne's. However, I'm aware that this is an open and public forum, but I would say I would query whether that is actually going to go forward, because my understanding there are the landlords are trying to pursue this individual to recover the premises as a result of their tenancy, and I think we may have more news on that in the next couple of months. So I doubt that appeal is actually going to proceed, but I don't think I probably want to say too much about that at the moment. So unless I can assist you further, that's all I had to say on the report.
Thank you. And again, yes, I would like to make a note of congratulating our excellent legal team, because you are the reason that we have so few appeals, because you give us such fantastic advice. So thank you so much. Yes, both of you, thank you, and I really appreciate that, and I'm sure all the committee agree with me on that one. Any questions about appeals?
Yes, please.
Yes,
thank you. Could we know, is Ariadne's actually trading at the moment?
Yes, he is.
They are.
And he's allowed to.
Thank you.
And can I just ask a question about that? Because obviously pubs are protected. So if I don't want to go into the whys and wherefore of the appeal now, that's not appropriate, but that would always be a licensed premises. Is that correct?
All I can say, we have been in discussion with the landlords over the last couple of months, and we're not aware of any intention to change that. Or there, yeah, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I understand we can't say too much right now. So thank you for that. Any other questions? No? So that was for information. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Any other items? Any other business? I know some members of the committee have a hearing afterwards. No other business. I have some other business. I would formally like to say thank you very much to various members of the committee who are stepping down from the council. We have Charles Williams, who sadly can't be with us here today, who I know has done a huge amount of work on the committee. Ian Waston as well is stepping down. But most of all, big thanks to Councillor Pat Healy, who has been the most amazing vice chair, sitting on many cases. A small gesture of thank you. And you really have been amazing. You will be very happy.
That is totally unexpected and really lovely. Thank you very much.
Well, we're going to miss you. And of course,